If you had met me last spring, you might have thought I had it all figured out. 33, a licensed structural engineer in Seattle, solo hikes on weekends, espresso machine that cost more than my first car, and a quiet corner condo filled with silence and plants that thrived better than most of my past relationships. But the truth? I was just the daughter who learned early not to take up too much space. My name's Evelyn Carr. And for as long as I can remember, I lived in the shadow of someone else's spotlight. My sister Melanie. 3 years older, Melanie was the child people noticed. Honor student, head cheerleader, married to a corporate lawyer by 25, two kids by 28. She made family photo albums and color-coded grocery lists. She remembered to send thank you notes. I remembered to check the structural integrity of pedestrian bridges. And still, every holiday dinner, the same question would float my way like a knife wrapped in linen napkins. Are you seeing anyone yet, Evelyn? As if my worth could only be measured in matching dishware and wedding invitations. I didn't resent Melanie, not really. She played the part she was given, and she played it well. But it was our mother, Denise, who made the rules, the silent measuring tape. The one who asked Melanie if she was eating enough, and me if I was finally thinking about freezing my eggs. I told myself for years that if I just worked harder, got one more promotion, paid for brunch without blinking, they'd see me. Not as the insurance policy, not as the fallback daughter, but as enough. But recognition never came. At least, not in the way I hoped. My accomplishments were things my mother didn't understand, so she dismissed them. You still at that same company? Oh, that's nice. She said nice the way people say bland. So I stopped trying. I stopped bringing work updates to the table. I sent flowers on birthdays, called on Christmas, and kept my distance. Distance made things easier. Less air to choke on. Fewer reminders that I was always the one expected to give more because I asked for less. I thought keeping space between us would be enough to keep the peace. That if I stayed quiet, respectful, helpful in small, invisible ways, I could avoid being drawn into their drama. I was wrong. Because when my sister's life fell apart and my mother came knocking, not with worry, but with plans, that distance vanished. And what she asked of me? It wasn't just unfair. It was war disguised as family. Melanie's life didn't collapse overnight. It cracked in whispers and silences, like a foundation slowly shifting under too much weight. It started with fewer calls from her, then vague social media posts about new beginnings and closed doors. I didn't push. We were never close in the way some sisters are, the kind who swap clothes and secrets. Ours was more formal, polite, a holiday bond. But I still noticed when her husband, Matt, disappeared from the pictures. Eventually, the truth came out. A friend of hers from church called me, of all people. Matt had been cheating for years, and not quietly. There were messages, receipts, even photos. Melanie had finally confronted him after finding a hotel charge on a joint credit card. He left that night with a duffel bag and silence. No child support, no shared custody talks. Just gone. She was left with two kids, Tyler and Jude, and an avalanche of debt she hadn't seen coming. Mom acted like it was a noble tragedy. She's so strong, she'd say, wiping imaginary tears, doing it all on her own. Except she wasn't. Melanie had no full-time job, no savings, and two growing boys in a cramped apartment where the sink leaked and the heater groaned like it was giving up. And me? I paid her retainer for a lawyer, quietly. No one asked, but no one offered either. I covered 4 months of her rent when her hours got cut at the daycare where she'd started working. I bought new winter coats for the boys when Mom said she'd already spent enough on gifts this year. I even picked them up from school when Melanie had interviews or was too emotionally gutted to move. Not once did I bring it up. Not once did I ask for thanks. Because I wasn't doing it for approval anymore. I was doing it because two boys needed warmth. Because Melanie, for the first time in her charmed life, looked fragile. Like someone who was used to being admired, not abandoned. And still, even as I chipped in from the sidelines, I thought maybe, this would be the moment Mom saw me clearly. That she'd realize the dependable daughter was the one holding the scaffolding together. But that wasn't how Denise Carr operated. Instead, every phone call became a sermon about Melanie's strength, her courage, her determination. Every check I wrote disappeared into silence. Every small kindness I gave was treated like background music. I told myself it didn't matter. That being invisible was better than being resented. What I didn't know was that my mother had already written the next chapter, and in it I wasn't the helper. I was the solution. It was a Thursday evening when the call came. "Sweetheart," Mom said, her voice high and chipper in that artificial way she used when she wanted something. "We have such wonderful news. Can you come over tonight? We'd love to tell you in person." I was tired. I'd just wrapped a 12-hour day on site at a bridge inspection project outside Tacoma. My shoulders ached. My steel-toe boots were still on, and the only plan I had was microwaving leftovers and falling asleep before the second act of any show I clicked. But her tone had that sparkle. Too rehearsed, too smooth. I hesitated. "Is Melanie okay? Is it about the boys?" "No, no, better," she chirped. "Just come. You'll see." I drove across the city, traffic like molasses, and my thoughts heavier with each mile. When I pulled into the driveway, Melanie's SUV was already there. Porch light glowing, curtains drawn. Inside, the living room was arranged like a staged intervention. Melanie sat on the sofa, clutching a mug she wasn't drinking from. Mom stood, beaming beside her. On the coffee table was a manila envelope. Thick. The kind you get when you close on a property. "There she is." Mom opened her arms wide, hugging me quickly before steering me toward the table. "Go on, open it." I picked up the envelope and slid out the contents. Mortgage documents, property title, legal paperwork, real estate letterhead. My name wasn't on any of it, but Melanie's was. Front and center. "What is this?" I asked slowly. "A new start," Mom said proudly. "We bought Melanie a house. 3 bedrooms, great school district, a big yard for the boys. Isn't it beautiful?" I blinked. "You bought her a house?" She nodded. "Well, we fronted the down payment, most of our savings actually. And Melanie found the perfect place, but she needs someone reliable to help with the rest." I looked at my sister. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her fingers were trembling slightly around the mug. I felt something darken inside me. "Wait," I said. "Why are you giving this to me?" Mom's face softened like she was explaining something obvious. "Because you're in a stable place. You've been saving for years, right? No family, no major obligations. We just thought you could take over the mortgage." My chest tightened. "You thought I would pay for her house?" "She can't afford the monthly payments," Mom said gently. "But you can. And the boys deserve a home." My voice came out flat. "I've already paid for her lawyer. Her rent, winter coats, I've given thousands of dollars." "And we're grateful," she said, placing a hand on mine like that made it noble. "But this is bigger. It's a chance to give them real stability. Isn't that worth it?" I stood up slowly, the envelope still in my hand. "No," I said. "What's worth it is not being treated like a blank check with a pulse." I left the folder on the table, and I walked out before I started screaming. I thought they'd come to their senses. I told myself that once the shock wore off, once the emotion settled, my mother would call and say she was sorry, that she understood how unfair it was to expect me to fund an entire mortgage just because I had a retirement account and no kids. But the apology never came. Instead, my cousin Adrian called me 2 days later. We hadn't spoken since our grandmother's funeral, and she didn't even bother with hello. "I heard you refused to help Melanie. Is that true?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "She's your sister, Evelyn. She's raising 2 boys alone. You have one job and no one to support. You couldn't just help?" I gripped my phone so tightly my hand hurt. "Adrian, you don't know the whole story. I know enough," she snapped. "She's drowning, and you just stood there and watched." She hung up before I could finish the sentence forming in my throat. That was just the beginning. Text messages, voicemails, Facebook DMs from relatives I hadn't seen since middle school. Aunt Maureen, Uncle Vic, even one of Melanie's old coworkers. I didn't even know how they got my number. All saying the same thing. "You're heartless, you're selfish, she's family. You should help." But what stung wasn't the judgment. It was their certainty. None of them had called when I was covering her rent. No one had noticed when I canceled my vacation last fall to wire Melanie money for a car repair. They didn't know I'd taken personal time from work to watch the boys when her babysitter ghosted her. But now they were experts on what I owed. The worst came from my mother's older sister, Aunt Celeste. She called while I was grocery shopping, her voice syrupy with that fake compassion she used to wield like a weapon. "Sweetheart," she said, "you may not understand now, but someday you'll regret pushing your family away." I held my breath. "You don't have children. Who's going to look after you when you're older? At least this way you'd be doing something meaningful." "You mean buying meaning?" I said coldly. She tisked. "Don't be dramatic. You're in a position to help. That's what family does." I ended the call mid-sentence. Then I blocked every number that had tried to guilt me. I sat in my car, hands trembling, watching people push carts filled with fruit and detergent, and I realized this wasn't about one house. This was about a lifetime of being seen as the one who would never say no. Well, I had, and they hated me for it. It arrived on a Tuesday. A thick envelope, hand-delivered and stamped with the logo of a law firm I didn't recognize. I thought it was a mistake at first. Some clerical error, maybe something related to a condo zoning update. But the moment I pulled out the papers, my breath caught in my throat. My mother was suing me. Denise Carr, listed as the plaintiff, represented by a family attorney whose firm handled estate planning and small claims. The lawsuit demanded $300,000 in reimbursement for costs related to the upbringing and early development of the defendant, intended to be redirected toward the mortgage payments on Melanie's home. I sat on the floor. They were itemized: food, shelter, medical care, school supplies. Even emotional guidance during adolescence, as if all those side-eyed glances and passive-aggressive comments were a premium service. There was a section titled Family Contributions Toward Future Prosperity, which read like a twisted resume of every school trip and after-school activity they had ever funded, down to $8 for my 7th grade field trip to the museum. I stared at the final page. They weren't even pretending. It clearly stated that the funds would be used in full to complete the mortgage obligations of Melanie Carr and her minor children. I didn't cry. I laughed. Quietly, bitterly, the way you do when the absurdity of something hits so hard it short-circuits your emotions. Then I called Charlotte Dean. I'd worked with her once on a nonprofit board review, and I remembered her being sharp, unflinching, and utterly calm under pressure. She met me the next day at her office, tucked in the corner of a downtown high-rise, her glasses sliding slightly down her nose as she flipped through the documents. "They're serious," I said. She nodded. "Serious and wrong." "You've seen this before?" "More than you'd think," she replied. "Parents who feel entitled, children who finally say no." She set the file down and looked at me plainly. "There is no legal basis for this. Parents are obligated to care for their children while they're minors. That's not a loan, that's the job. And in your case," she gestured toward the second stack of papers I'd brought, "you've provided them with support, not the other way around." I'd spent the weekend pulling together every transfer, Venmo receipt, bank statement, and email thread I could find. $5,300 to Melanie's lawyer, $6,800 in rent, $400 for school clothes, grocery runs, utility bills, gift cards. And my mother still believed I owed her. Charlotte leaned back in her chair. "They're hoping you'll give in to avoid a courtroom, but I won't let them shame you into silence." And just like that, for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. The courtroom was colder than I expected for early summer. The walls were beige, the benches stiff, and the hum of the overhead lights filled the silence with a tension that clung to my skin. I sat beside Charlotte, dressed in a slate gray suit and the earrings my grandmother gave me when I graduated. I didn't look at the other side of the room until I felt it, my mother's gaze burning like a spotlight. She sat with her back straight, a serene expression that felt more like performance than calm. Melanie was beside her, hair pulled back, eyes fixed on her lap like she was trying to disappear. The judge entered. Silver hair, quiet presence, glasses low on his nose. He looked like a man who had lost patience for nonsense decades ago. Denise Carr stood first. "Your Honor," she began, voice honey-sweet, "this is not a case of bitterness. This is about fairness. My daughter Evelyn has benefited from years of support, financial, emotional, parental, and now that we are older and Melanie is in need, we simply ask that Evelyn give back to the family that gave her so much. The judge flipped through the file. And these funds you're requesting, $300,000, are to be used for? To pay off the mortgage for Melanie's home, she said, calm as a sunrise. So you're not seeking compensation for your own household, but for your other daughter. That's right. For her and her children. The judge turned to Melanie. Miss Carr, do you believe your sister owes you a mortgage? Melanie shifted. She doesn't have a family, she said quietly. She doesn't have the same expenses. It just made sense. He raised an eyebrow. To whom? My chest thudded. Charlotte stood, unshaken, measured. Your Honor, we have extensive documentation proving that Ms. Evelyn Carr has been financially independent since the age of 18. Furthermore, we've provided records of significant financial assistance given to both her mother and sister over the past 5 years. She handed over the folder. Us. This includes over $12,000 in direct payments to Melanie Carr and over $3,500 in cash and utility support to Denise Carr. The judge reviewed the papers in silence. Then, without looking up, he asked, did the plaintiffs contribute to Evelyn Carr's college education? Denise hesitated. No, she got a scholarship, but we provided her with emotional support. Would you care to define that? Silence. Charlotte didn't flinch. Your Honor, this lawsuit is not about principle. It's about coercion. My client said no, and instead of respecting her boundary, her mother attempted to turn obligation into debt. The judge looked back at my mother. So let me be clear. You never supported your daughter financially after age 18, and yet you expect her to finance a mortgage for her sibling because she is unmarried and has no children? Denise's face twitched. We're a family. Family helps. The judge's voice was steady. Family does not demand payment under threat of lawsuit. And for the first time in my life, someone with power saw it exactly as it was. 1 week later, I returned to the same courtroom, but everything felt different. This time, I wasn't bracing for battle. I wasn't rehearsing my answers or swallowing my anger. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, while Charlotte organized our file one last time. She didn't speak much. She didn't have to. The facts had done all the talking. Across the aisle, my mother stared straight ahead. Her lips were pursed in that same disappointed line I'd known since childhood. Melanie sat beside her, looking smaller somehow. Or maybe I'd just stopped seeing her the way I used to. The judge entered. No robe-fluttering drama, just quiet authority. After reviewing all submitted documentation and testimony, he said, I find the plaintiff's claims to be without legal merit. He glanced at my mother. Ms. Carr, the cost of raising a child is not a debt that can be retroactively charged once the child becomes an adult. It is a responsibility, a choice, not a loan. Denise didn't blink. He continued. Furthermore, the court recognizes that the defendant, Evelyn Carr, has provided substantial financial assistance to both the plaintiff and Melanie Carr in recent years. It is the opinion of this court that the lawsuit brought forward was not only unfounded, but exploitative in nature. He closed the file. Case dismissed. The gavel didn't slam. The silence did. I didn't move. Not right away. Charlotte touched my arm lightly and I stood, numb. As we walked toward the doors, I heard Melanie say something, too soft to catch. I didn't look back. Outside, the sun was too bright. Like the world had the nerve to go on shining after everything. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I breathed, deep and slow. That night, my grandparents called. They'd been in court, quietly sitting in the back row, watching it all unfold. Grandma said she'd never been prouder. Grandpa just said, You held your line. Then Grandma hesitated. Your mother came by this afternoon, she said. She asked us to release her inheritance early. My throat tightened. For the house? Yes. What did you say? I told her it's not her money to demand. That the will is ours to manage, and we're not making decisions out of guilt. Did she get angry? No, Grandma said softly. She cried. She begged us not to disinherit her. And somehow that hurt more. She hadn't cried in court. Not when she listed the cost of raising me like a bill to be settled. But she cried when she couldn't control the money. Some people only mourn what they lose, not who they lose. I closed on a house 3 months after the trial. Nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, a sloped backyard, a little porch that creaked when you stepped too hard. But it was mine. Every inch, paid with the money I had been saving for a decade. The money my mother once believed was hers to assign. I painted the kitchen a soft shade of yellow, planted rosemary and lavender in mismatched clay pots, adopted a rescue cat with a crooked tail and the gentlest eyes I'd ever seen. I named him Fig. He sleeps beside my laptop now, curled in the warmth of quiet. Some mornings I catch him staring out the window like he's remembering a world he doesn't miss. I know the feeling. I didn't hear from Melanie or my mother for almost a year. No birthdays, no apologies, just silence that felt like freedom. Then one afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line. Just this. We heard you bought a house. Since you have the extra space, it makes sense for Melanie and the boys to move in with you. It would be more convenient for them, and you wouldn't have to live alone anymore. Let us know what date works. It wasn't signed with love, just names. I read it twice. Not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I just replied, I will not be hosting Melanie or her children. If you contact me again with demands of this nature, I will report it as harassment. Do not email me again. I hit send, blocked the address. Then I made a cup of tea and sat on my porch swing until the light faded behind the trees. These days, my house smells like coffee and sun-warmed basil. Fig chases shadows that dance across the hardwood floors. My grandmother visits every other Sunday with pies she insists are store-bought, but I know better. Grandpa pretends he's only there to fix the gutters, but he always brings an old newspaper for me, just in case. They don't ask about my mother, and I don't offer. Some wounds don't scab over. They calcify, and you learn to stop pressing them like they'll ever feel less tender. I still wonder about the boys sometimes. What they've been told, what they'll remember. But I don't wait for the call. I'm seeing someone now. His name's Jonah. He never asks about my family. Not yet. And I haven't decided if I'll ever tell him. Some ties don't need explaining. Some homes aren't meant to be rebuilt. And peace? It doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces. But when it finally arrives, it's enough.